Um, colleagues, workshop participants on either of these tables. I would just like to, first of all, welcome you all to this second part of our multi-event. At the same time, we have a couple of other events, so I'm going to be the only one from the Directorate welcoming you, and Dražen will join us a little bit later. This is basically, in short, the technical part of the high-level roundtable that we saw in the morning. We're going to go a little bit more into details here on financing disaster risk reduction. We're going to actually talk about how we can finance disaster risk reduction, and I hope more than looking at the presentations, we're going to discuss what we can do in the future and how we can easily implement what we've learned here back home in our offices. That's, I think, the core of what we're going to be doing today afternoon, tomorrow, and Thursday morning. You're also going to have a little bit of your own tasks, so it's not all about the speakers. You're going to have a group work and develop your own plans eventually, but we're going to talk about that a little bit more in the afternoon and tomorrow. I wish you and I wish us all a productive few days, a productive couple of days, really great discussions, and I hope we can all learn from each other and most of all exchange experiences, because that's what we're here for. I don't know, Zawisza, if you want to say something, and then Nick, if you want to join us.
Hello, everybody. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to Natasha Holzinger. She forgot it. She is a member of Croatian and Civil Protection Directorate. And actually, that is. Do you want to say anything more about yourself? Okay. Yeah. As I said, my name is Zawisza Šimac. I am working with Civil Protection Directorate, Croatia. And today I'm going to present you our, is it now? Yeah, okay. Yeah, of course. Before I start, I'm going to present the questionnaire that we jointly work with our colleagues here.
Thank you, Zawisza, and thank you. Well, welcome everyone. From our side, UNDRR's office, we're looking forward to very much to this workshop. There are a number of kind of key components that we'll kind of see throughout the next couple of days, focusing on financing, budget tagging. We have a couple of presentations on this, on building resilience of SMEs. One of the key recommendations, which Zawisza will mention, was risk assessment for SMEs and eventually building these business continuity plans. So looking forward to look further at that. Of course, also local resilience building. There's the Making Cities Resilient initiative. And then as well, a short presentation on the stress testing resilient infrastructure. So very much looking forward to discussing with you all over the next couple of days, and thank you.
Thank you, Nick, and I thank all of the colleagues from UNDRR. It's been quite a few tasks, quite a workload preparing this workshop and the high-level event as well. So I thank you for your patience and for all the work and all the help with the event. And I think we can continue with the agenda. So before the workshop started, I think a month or a couple of weeks before, we also sent to the participating states, to the member states, 2 questionnaires. One was just for the countries, and the other one was for the SMEs. What we wanted to do with this is just set the scene for disaster risk reduction financing discussion, see what the situation is right now, and maybe not repeat everything that you already know and everything that you're already doing, but sort of review it, put it into one place, and have a summary of what the situation is in the region, and then we can move forward from that point on. Zavisha is now going to present the results of these questionnaires, and we can discuss that a little bit later. And it's also going to be sort of intertwined into different topics throughout the 2 days. So Zavisha.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to present the results of a questionnaire, because the second one, the questionnaire on financing disaster risk reduction, well, it's was quite huge, and we didn't receive all the data at time, and didn't have enough time to make analysis. But I want to share with you what was the questionnaire about. There was a 21 question that we were trying to establish what does a disaster risk management as a term means in different countries. We would like to, we're planning to establish means of coordination of disaster risk management in countries. What are the core documents? And definitely, what is the link between disaster risk reduction and national budget? A few questions were meant to investigate about incentives for disaster risk investment, and we were interested in finding if in your countries there is some kind of disaster risk reduction fund, whether it's relief fund, emergency fund, whatever. So this analysis is still ongoing, so there is not going to be a presentation about that. The presentation is going to be about SMEs and their resilience on disaster. Questionnaire on resilience, on SME resilience, was a 28 question questionnaire. The questions was divided in 7 groups, and we're going to go through all of them. Yeah, a little bit boring, but I'm going to be really fast. It was online questionnaire, and once more, thank you guys from UNDRR for your help. So this is the country that took a part of this questionnaire. Thank you all for that. And we have 2 previous questionnaires done in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Serbia. And during the tomorrow's lectures, our colleagues from Serbia is going to present the results, and is going to present the follow-up steps they already took. So the question about establishing type of business, as you see, most of the answers came from the service sector, so it's a tertiary or quaternary sector. So it's a little bit, it's a small share about agricultural or industry or mining. They're quite old companies, over the 40% of them are over the 20 years old. Most of them are describes themselves as entrepreneur. Basically, they're that company of 1 or 2 employees, and that's the other number. So 77% of them are companies that have less than 10 people employed. And of course, according to EU definition of small and medium enterprises, we have this division, and basically all of them are have turnover less than 2 million per year. The next line of questions, with the next line of question, we were trying to establish SMEs experience with disasters with these 5 questions. So we can move on. The first question was what is significant hazards that can influence your business, and the connected question is what are the hazards that actually impacted your SMEs. So as you can see, there are similar. What is sticking here is pandemic. So everybody was actually hurt by these last 2 years by COVID pandemic. And since the most of the answers came from Croatia, the earthquakes took quite a share as the significant hazards. Others were selected extreme temperature and extreme weather events. Basically, more or less, that's the similar answers. What type of impact did they suffer during the disasters? Most of them selected loss of revenues or reduced sales, inability to continue business activities, and physical damage, especially due to the earthquakes in Croatia. The question on how long this disruption of business lasts, more than 7 days, so it's quite significant period of disruption. And the question, were you a part or owned SMEs that was closed due to disaster? Well, quarter of them say yes, so it's quite a significant number SMEs that were closed due to the disasters. What else did we find what else we were trying to find out was how they manage their risks. So there was another five questions. Does your country or county or municipality have disaster risk assessment? If yes, does the risk assessment assess the risk that can have a negative impact on your business? Does your business conduct a risk assessment before new investment? Does your business have an emergency plan? And last question was, does your company have a strategy plan in place to deal with the risk that you have identified? So this is the results. What these results show us actually that we in disaster risk management business or sector, well, this is on us. The SMEs are not aware of existence, especially in Croatia, of existence of local or regional risk assessment. I think that is something that we all should work on. Is it existing risk assessment have a risk that can have negative effect on SMEs? Well, out of these 21%, 50 of them are not aware or they don't know. So it's another thing that we need to work on. So we need to raise awareness among the SMEs that there is a risk assessment, that there is a document that they can have and read and get information about the risk that are actually dealing with, or the risk that can have a negative effect on their business. Do the SMEs conduct a risk assessment? Well, this is quite interesting question, and I'm sorry, the text was too big. I didn't have opportunity to put the percentage, but you can calculate it. They are forced to do risk assessment, so they are doing it. 39% of them said that it's a common procedure for them, and 35% said they're not doing risk assessment at all for their business. So it's another thing that we have to improve. Well, this is something that they should on their own if they are serious owners or they want to continue without disruption. So do they have emergency plan or business continuity plan or recovery plan? Well, this is quite sad data. 63% of SMEs don't have even emergency plan. A difference between emergency plan and recovery plan, this is something that prescribes you to do what to do in the case of disaster, and this is something that actually comes after disaster. So this is something that we have to explain to the SMEs and to explain why this is important for them to have developed. Another thing that we ask them is about investing in disaster risk reduction and risk transfer. There's, of course, 5 questions, as earlier. So the first question was about disaster risk insurance. Early this morning, we heard it's quite important thing that that we can use. We can do everything. We can implement disaster risk measures. We can educate us. We can raise the capacities and everything. But there is small bit of residual risk that usually is a surprise to us, and this is where insurance come in and can help us. So 51%, half of them are not insured. So this is something that need to be corrected, definitely. What does the insurance cover? So basically, physical damage, tools and other assets, raw materials, and damage to the third parties are something that everybody knows that they have to insure. But you can see that only 8% of them are insured their loss of revenues. Even I don't know, is it possible, but you can probably insure your prestige if you lose your business, lose your means of producing something. You have to have something that after a certain period you can go back to the market and start all over again. So insurance is quite an important thing to small business to have. Yeah. Okay, what was we trying to find is there incentives by the government, whether it's a local or national, for SMEs to implement some DRR activities, where 63 of them answered there is no any activities. This was actually questioned. This was actually answers that was provided to choose from. Some tax breaks, easy access to credits, reduce insurance premiums. Well, nobody selected that, and co-finance DRR project, only 10% of them selected this. So this is quite promising stuff. Did they implement some hazard proofing measures? Only 35% of them actually did something to mitigate possible unwanted impacts of disaster. And what was the main barriers dealing with disaster risk financing? It was too complicated administrative procedures, but also there is a lack of on the government side, but on the SME side there was lack of resources and capacity, lack of knowledge and skills, and a lack of awareness of the risk and potential impacts on business. So basically, we are both to blame, both SMEs and government in dealing with investment in DRR. And the last set of questions was about business dependencies. We were asking the SMEs what they need to continue their business. Most of them selected electricity, internet, and communication, which is according to the first slide that said that is basically a service sector. How long they can operate without deliveries from their suppliers? No one actually selected there is not a problem. 36% selected less than 1 month. So and how long they can operate because they closed permanently? 33% selected one day. Basically, this is not a good sign, and those SMEs that took part in a questionnaire are actually have quite low resilience to disaster. We also try to find out, is there anything like a disaster fund for SMEs, and if there is, how can they get financial support after disaster? So once more, almost 60% of SMEs are not aware, or they don't know if such a fund even exists. Out of these 18% that are actually know about or exist or there is existing disaster fund for SMEs, 11% of them actually don't know how to get that money to help them. So something that we need to correct. Tomorrow, as I said, we are going to hear about SME resilience analysis in Serbia. And there is another similar analysis already done in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And basically, results are more or less same in this questionnaire and in this analysis from these two countries. There is no they are quite similar. So what we did find from questionnaires? 1/3 of SMEs were closed due to disaster, and disaster impacted on this, as we already said, on these through three groups: on loss of revenues, physical damage, and inability to continue business activities more than a few days. This is something that we need to change. We have to raise awareness among the SMEs about national and local disaster risk assessment, explain them that this is a document that can actually help them doing their businesses. And what is more important, to explain that these documents, this risk assessment, are essential documents for investment, or as I said here, a sustainable investment. I forgot who said that this morning, but we have to explain them that investing in DRR actually is not losing money, but saving or even earning money. So this is another thing that we need to change, this share of developed emergency plan and BCPs or recovery plans. 53% of businesses is without any insurance. Now, this is quite a sad information. The insurance is really not that expensive if you look at what you can lose. So you invest small portion of money in insurance, and afterwards you can be if the disaster occur, you can be compensated and continue with your business. 66 of them did not implement any hazard proofing measures. Well, yeah, definitely we need to explain them why is that important and how that can help them. 63% said that there's no incentive, so they're actually asking national government to give them some incentive to help them to invest in resilience, and in that way, it is going to be a win-win situation, both for the national government and both for the SMEs. As we heard, the SMEs are backbone of every national economy and a budget. The important sector, at least in service sectors, are electricity, internet, communications. So this is maybe we can talk about later when we have presentation on the stress test of critical infrastructure. Yeah. So why these three things are important in these days for the SMEs. We can talk during the workshop about some kind of disaster fund for SMEs, and definitely we need to change this low resilience of SMEs by doing what we can do, and help them to change their position on insurance, risk assessment, and other stuff. So basically, this is the recommendation created from these questionnaires. This is for us, for policymakers. We need to develop the legislative that is going to enhance preventive measure implementation and definitely post-disaster planning. We need to think how we can help and all the process, how we can create the process that's going to be easier to implement it by SMEs to raise their resilience, and definitely we need something that can be implemented. So the SMEs definitely should think about insurances. What we need to enhance is the risk awareness, as I said earlier, and definitely collaboration between the SMEs and risk assessment experts. Basically, at least in Croatia, we don't have any contacts. At least we didn't have until these questionnaires. And we have definitely have to have some kind of collaboration between economy, financial, and disaster risk sector, as we heard this morning. The clusters are, I think, the clusters are very important, especially for the small companies. They are flexible. They can adapt to the economy, to the market very quickly. But are flexible and adaptable for the economy. They are really vulnerable to disasters, unlike the bigger companies. So one of the suggestions is that there are maybe they should create some kind of clusters that can help each other in this kind of situation. Some recommendation for the SMEs, they should help them to develop their capacities. We should entice them to have their own emergency fund, so they should put some money aside that can help them in the disaster situation. They need to develop their own risk assessment. They need to conduct the resilience testing annually. They need to create the business continuity plan, and definitely they should invest in insurance policies. And that's it. Did I? It's a little bit yeah, over 2 o'clock, but that's it. We can move forward. Sorry, questions? This is something that we are going to work on during your workshop. So, sorry, Susanna, yeah.
Hi, thank you. So Zavish, I was wondering, I think this is great, and I've seen such surveys being done. I think Italy had one of them, and we also conducted something similar in Romania, and the findings are actually very similar. It's very low awareness and low action, but we were thinking in terms of, what can be done, and I really like the set of options you also put on forward. Were you working in any case or in contact with a business association, whether for SMEs or for bigger groups? And would they be willing to, coordinate with you and become kind of trainer of trainers, or start some sort of, certification to engage their members? Because the task is so large to have, companies engaged, so you need some sort of partners in it.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, we had the contact with our Croatian Chamber of Commerce and Chamber of for really small businesses. I don't crafts. Yeah. Thank you. And actually, they expressed their willingness to deepen the collaboration. And after this workshop, we're going to contact them and see what is going to come after it. Basically, they said us that they are conducting similar analysis and questions, and they recognize importance of resilience, but at the same time, they didn't aware that we have a national risk assessment. So, yeah, that's on us. Yeah, that's on us. Yeah.
Hi. So most of the businesses are entrepreneurs, so very small. Would the results and the findings change if you would interview larger businesses? Because maybe, you know, if it's a one-man shop or a two-man shop, they're not that much concerned about disasters.
I'm sorry, the presentation had to be really short. But one of the findings was that actually all of them came from the service sector. So they're basically working from homes. We didn't have much of the agricultural sector present or mining sector. So definitely the results are going to change. Possibly the hazards that are influencing SMEs are going to change. What I need to say, the pool from Bosnia and Herzegovina and Serbia was tenfold bigger than in Croatia. So definitely we need to work first on questionnaire and the people participating, and then come to the results. But one thing definitely remains: the low resilience and low awareness. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Zavisha. If you come up with any questions later on or in the course of the week, Zavisha is here, and so are we. So we can either ask him or think about it and answer later, or more importantly, you all are having coffee breaks together, lunches together, so discuss and talk to each other. Next on our agenda is disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation expenditure tracking and observatory. And it's going to be presented by our colleagues from UNDRR and another one from the International Institute for Environment and Development. And they are going to join us online, but are going to be moderated by the UNDRR colleagues that are here. So I propose we give them a chance to share their presentation, and if that's not going to work, we can share it from here.
Yes, thank you so much. I just realized that my background was not appropriate for it, but so it was from another conference. So I apologize for that. I will try to see if I can change that. But so please disregard the background, the virtual background I have on the screen. So I'm very pleased to be with you. So my name is Mathieu Verhoogstraat. I am from the UN Disaster Risk Reduction Office of the UN, based in Geneva, and I'm working in the financing on financing issues mostly, so on DRR financing and also infrastructure resilience, and so and I'm here with some of my colleagues, but also some of our partner with whom we are working on this project, and really the idea of that section is really to talk about public investments and what we call DR and climate change adaptation expenditure tracking and tagging, and so the reason why we're talking about those issues, of course, because we want to raise awareness and increase investment and expenditure critical issue for reducing and preventing disaster risks, which are, as you all aware, very often under prioritized. And I think the reason, the business case for doing that is very clear. I mean, of course, we know that there are more and more disasters. They are more frequent, they are more severe, they're creating more impact on the society. So we need to increase investment to reduce those risks, but also to prevent them from happening. The second aspect, of course, is that we are also seeing that the current level of investment for risk reduction and prevention is inadequate. One study that was made a few years back was looking at the percentage of development assistance directed to disaster risk reduction and prevention, and out of basically a packet of $100 of donor assistance, only 40 cents were allocated to that priority. So you can see that this is something that has received not probably the right level of priority. And the third aspect I wanted to mention is, of course, that makes a lot of sense to invest in disaster risk reduction. And we all know some of those studies, but basically there's been demonstrated by many studies that every dollar basically that we're investing in resilience is actually leading to a multiple of $4 to $6 of benefits down the line because of the reduced losses, or because you are managing to prevent some risk from happening. So why I'm saying all of this is because what we are doing in this project is really trying to link and to understand more how much governments are spending or investing in DRR related issue and climate change adaptation. And so that's something that is was still very less known, because we know that there are not enough investment, but we don't know exactly how much is invested. And one of the reasons that we don't know that is because there are no clear understanding of what would qualify, for instance, as an expenditure, public expenditure for disaster risk reduction. There are no system for tracking that expenditure, for instance, in budget. We know in climate change adaptation and mitigation, there might be a bit more of that, but disaster risk reduction is broader than climate adaptation. And so the project that we have now started with the International Institute for Environment and Development is really about trying to address this gap and trying to develop what we call a taxonomy. So basically, I mean, in the EU, you must be very familiar with taxonomies, but a taxonomy, which is basically a classification system to see what expenditure are related to DR and what are not. And that's basically give you a sense of how much is currently being spent. We did a similar exercise, UNDRR, in 2020, reviewing national budgets of 16 African countries, and we found that on average 4% of national budget were spent on DR-related investments. But there is no kind of global understanding on how to do that, and I think that's what we're trying to, the gap that we're trying to fulfill. And the idea is not only to, of course, get a sense of how much is spent, but more using that information to really be able to start increasing investment in these very important areas. But I'm not going to go into the detail of what we're doing, because we have our colleague Bye here for guiding you through the methodology and how far the project is. But the last word I would say is that, so we're developing that kind of taxonomy classification system for budget tagging and tracking, but also we are also considering an observatory, which will be at the international level, where basically we will be able to also exchange best practice in this area, but also monitor what the different countries, how much each country is basically spending on this issue. But with that short introduction, I'm very happy to pass it over to Baiba. Thank you. And apologize again for the for the background, which is not the right way. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Matthew, for this introduction. Yes, as Matthew already explained, the background to my presentation is that International Institute for Environment and Development is working with UNDRR to set up a methodology, common methodology for expenditure tagging and tracking, and also to develop a taxonomy, so how to classify such expenditures, all meant to increase the capacities of countries to be able to track what you are spending on disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation. So let me start sharing my presentation on this. I will first have a presentation, and then hopefully we have also some time to have a short question and answer session. Sorry, I get a message, host disabled participant screen sharing. Can then somebody else share my presentation?
I think someone has to make you presenter, I guess, no?
Yes.
Barbara, can you try to share it now?
Yes, it's working now.
Is it working now? Is it now in presentation mode?
Oh, no.
Oh, no, it is in presentation mode. Yes. Okay, excellent. So yeah, I will briefly explain you what is happening in Europe in terms of tracking disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation expenditures. What are the main experiences so far? And then recommendations and points for discussion. What I wanted to make, to explain that this is based mostly on literature review, to some extent also interviews. We were hoping to be able to use results of the survey that the colleague presented earlier, but as it was explained, the answers by the national government were very limited. So unfortunately, we were not able to use much from that. But before I start, let me come back to the question, why track climate and disaster risk expenditure? So let me ask you, everybody, as persons, as individuals, can you answer these questions about your country? How much money is in the state budget for climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction? Who spends that money and on what? Is that all money spent on what is defined as priorities for your country? How effectively this money is being spent? How big is a funding gap and for what? I mean, we were talking about funding gaps earlier, but then how big is this gap? Let me pause here for a few seconds so that these questions settle. And I really mean, ask yourself about your specific country. Can you answer these questions? Well, if you are not able to ask all those questions, then how can you clearly justify the need to increase the funding for DRR and climate change adaptation? I mean, it's a bit like a situation you would go to a bank and say, oh, I have this super good project. I will chip in some money. My friends and family will also put something. So if you give me $1 million or $2 million, I think we will do some great things. I mean, you will not be taken very seriously. So when you talk with, for example, with the Ministry of Finance or politicians, decision makers about the need to increase the funding for disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation, you have to be able to justify that, including with figures. So this is where the expenditure tracking comes in to play. When looking at Europe, it was actually quite surprising to realize that there is not that much happening. Only France is actually tracking climate adaptation and disaster risk prevention expenditure. Moldova has also prepared methodology for doing that, but it has not been implemented yet. Then a number of countries track climate expenditure without separating climate adaptation and mitigation. And in addition, also Norway is tracking what is called green expenditure, which doesn't really separate climate clearly. Then several countries have done once-off estimates. What happened in Armenia in 2017 it was a climate public expenditure and institutional review. I will explain a little bit later what's the difference between simply tracking and such a review. And Azerbaijan is going to prepare one soon. And then with help of World Bank in 2017, there was a simple disaster response expenditure assessment done in Armenia and Serbia as part of the country notes, which looked at public funds available for disaster-related expenditures and annual expenditures. However, those focused more on response to disasters and to lesser extent on prevention. Then in some countries, we found also that such expenditure tracking is done also by municipalities. However, there is very little information available. Some municipalities in France have tried to do that, and the city of Oslo in Norway annually develops a dedicated climate budget, assessing how their budget helps to implement the targets, city targets for mitigation and adaptation. So how the expenditure is being tracked in different countries. So some countries would do that on an annual basis, and in some cases it is sort of once-off exercise or once in 5 or once in 10 years exercises. Let me briefly explain you the difference between the two. So at the basis of both, it is the process what we call budget tagging done to track the expenditure. So you would look at budget lines, preferably at the sort of most detailed level, and then you assess based on a number of criteria whether that expenditure has a positive impact. And some countries would also look at expenditure which has negative impact. And then you decide whether that expenditure is 100% of it should be regarded as positive, or maybe some proportion of it should be regarded as positive or negative. However, it is possible to extend this with looking at wider environment where this process takes place and what are the policy links with the budgets. So that is where policy and institutional analysis comes in place, which would typically be done on less often basis. So what are the policy frameworks and monitoring frameworks, and how policies translate into programs and instruments, and also at institutions, what are the institutions involved in all these processes, their roles, responsibilities, capacities, and what are budgetary and planning processes, and more importantly, how the budgetary processes link with policies and programs. And in case of such broader assessments, they would also typically look also at fiscal instruments and fiscal incentives or disincentives. So, for example, if I may link with a previous presentation about the need to create incentives for resilience investment. So such a broader assessment, expenditure review, could potentially look into what fiscal measures are being used in the country to stimulate enterprises to invest in resilience. And if there aren't such incentives, then how the countries could address this gap. So based on our assessment, we see some typical elements of expenditure tracking. So objectives are mostly related with transparency, so that you are able to report to the government, to the parliament, to the general public what you are spending on what. Also on national and international commitments, of course, to improve policies and their implementation, and in some cases also it was linked with implementation of green bonds. Then the coverage, most countries would be tracking only favorable or positive expenditure. However, France tracks on annual basis also negative expenditure. So what kind of expenditure is counterproductive to your climate adaptation objectives and disaster risk objectives? And Finland and Italy has done it on sort of once-off basis, identified what subsidies have negative impact on climate adaptation. Most countries look only at central government expenditure. France also at transfers to local level and state-owned enterprises. Then how it is being decided how a certain budget line is attributed to disaster risk or climate adaptation expenditure. So in most cases, it is done in sort of binary way. So yes, no, yeah. So 0% or 100%. However, in some cases, they use scaled approach, meaning that depending on the nature of expenditure, it would be decided that, okay, 40% of this expenditure we regard as climate adaptation expenditure, for example, or 80 or 20. Then I wanted to briefly touch also on special funds. We know in many countries there are environmental funds, climate funds, there are different schemes for compensations and disaster risk management. What we learned from the survey was that actually in Slovenia, there is also some earmarking. So making sure that the money goes to disaster risk management through earmarking some revenues of fire tax. Another example is emission trading system auction revenues, which in all EU countries, a certain percentage should be spent on climate. However, most of that is spent on mitigation and not on adaptation. And here is maybe also a possibility how countries could, where countries could look into when talking about increasing funding for climate adaptation. And then as a result, you can get different data, like what is your expenditure on climate as compared to total public expenditure, and how does that compare with negative expenditure? Or what is the expenditure between different sectors? Yeah, here an example from Italy. So which sectors would be having environment or climate expenditure? You can have also different data like recurrent versus investment costs, expenditure per priorities stated in relevant disaster risk management and national adaptation plans, etc. So all that helps you to understand where that money goes and how much money goes where. So these expenditure reviews, also these broader exercises, which look also at policies and institutions, have been proven to be effective tools for raising awareness, understanding, and communicating. I noticed, for example, that according to the survey presented earlier, a lot of small SMEs regard as highest risk earthquakes. Interestingly, the disaster response expenditure analysis in Armenia showed that even though perception there indeed is that also that earthquakes is really the big one. But when you look at disaster response expenditure, and after excluding this one time of major earthquake, actually it turned out that floods also had a very significant share of expenditure. So this can help you to communicate where are the real risks and understand them. It also helped to create and increase support for certain fiscal reforms, in particular related to taxation. Also, it can help identify priorities for further integration of DRR and climate budgeting in national budget systems, priorities for policy reforms, and also shortcomings with institutional arrangements and bottlenecks with disbursement of funds, and how to address these. And then this more regular exercise, what is done typically on annual basis, that has, of course, helped to increase the transparency. Another important aspect that it is an opportunity for ministries to engage in discussion with other ministries and influence budget discussions, engage civil society. It is also a first step in assessing the relationship between the budgets and goals, respective goals. And as I showed in one of my earlier slides, the tagging of negative expenditure allows you to show it in proportional context, the positive expenditure, and also to prioritize measures for removing such expenditure. A word of warning, budget tagging is only a tool. And it will be only useful if it serves for political action. So if you don't use the findings to change the policies, it doesn't have much influence. The main challenges, well, about the institutionalization, I would say the ministries of finance play a very critical role. So how to engage them, how to persuade them that this is really something important also for them. Then, of course, it is something that requires time and knowledge. So how to address the capacities. It is also something that should be done by many ministries and agencies. Disaster risk management and climate adaptation are both very cross-cutting issues. So how do you work with those all other institutions? How do you coordinate? Who is responsible for what? And this is definitely something that donor-supported initiatives need to consider in order to ensure longer-term sustainability. And then, of course, the question about definitions and methodologies. And in case of DRR and climate adaptation expenditure, another important question is how to identify this expenditure at local level, as local authorities often play a very big role in implementing measures. Then, of course, also interlinkages between DRR and climate adaptation. While often and increasingly we see that this is well identified at policy level, but implementation still often happens in silos. And in case of DRR, another aspect is often it is difficult to separate clearly prevention from response. So in terms of recommendations, there is obviously need for integrated DRR and climate change policy strategies that clearly present the objectives, expected outcomes, directions, and policy interventions, as that allows you then to relate the expenditure to the priorities. And strategic planning of disaster risk management should have that capacity to integrate climate adaptation strategies and adaptation measures during DRM planning. And before embarking on such tagging, it is definitely important to carefully examine the roles and mandates of various institutions and to be realistic about what you can achieve in shorter term and what should be left for longer term. So one option how to go about it could be learning and gradual optimization, where you start with a relatively simple system and introduce additional features as the capacity increases. Or start with such a wider policy and institutional assessment where you understand who are the main players and influencers and where are the main gaps, and then you build it from there. And then for the discussions, not just now after my presentation, but I understand there will be several moments when you will be discussing different questions. I wanted to put these following questions to you. How do you see how such budget tagging and tracking could benefit your countries? Why would you consider to introduce it? And then what would be your first steps and with whom you would do it? And secondly, what are the main capacity gaps and how could these gaps be addressed? I am stopping here now. I realize I have exceeded my time limit, for which I apologize.
Thank you very much, Baiba. So for everyone here, so I'm David Baker. I'm with the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. I realize that we're pretty short in time and we're eating into our coffee break, but it would be great to have a little bit of a discussion. So I thank Baiba and Matteo for giving a very good overview of the importance of DRR and CCA expenditure tagging, and also in kind of a shorter time. And I think it's really important to think about this over the next kind of few days. That's why we're here as well. It was highlighted in the high-level panel as well, the real importance of looking systematically kind of across different sectors, understanding where we're spending money on disaster risk reduction, where not, and how to kind of improve that. When a part of the readings that were given to us ahead of this event was a European Union discussion paper that really also highlighted the very kind of saturated approaches, even within the EU, again, highlighting the need to really come together and look at this approach to in a more comprehensive way. So with that, with a few minutes left, it would be great if any people here have any questions, to raise your hand for Baiba or for Mathieu, or even just to kind of raise any experiences from your country level as well.
Hello, thank you. I have a question for Baiba. I would like to know if this tracking takes into account not only the cost or the expenditure on investment, but also indirect costs, like, for instance, personal or human resources devoted to this type of investment. And also, I would like to know if decentralized states also, in those cases, if regions also could participate, not only local level, but regional authorities, because sometimes they have the competence on this matter. Thank you.
Um, shall I answer now, or you wait for
Yeah,
more?
please go ahead. I don't think we have any other
I
questions.
am not the first part about this decentralized budget tracking. I mean, in Europe, I only found examples of tracking at national level, and then in France and in Oslo municipal level. However, if a country thinks that it is important to track such expenditure at regional level, definitely methodology can be developed and adapted for that. But I didn't find examples of that. Could you explain the first part of your question?
Yes, I would like to know if the expenditure tracking refers only to the investment on DRR.
I understand. Yeah. This again depends on how country designs its system. In France, they are tracking both investments and current expenditure, so also personnel, also salary costs in the ministries or agencies, etc., etc. However, Ireland, for example, tracks only investments. Again, it depends on what, why you want this information and how you plan to use it. I hope I answered the question.
Great, thank you very much. Any other questions in the room? And just to flag as well, there's Baiba's email there, but please do also come to me and pull my sleeve if you want to know more about this initiative. And also, we're very keen to hear more about experiences at country level that we haven't captured before, and also to kind of work together to build that knowledge. So I know that we're out of time now, but maybe over the next 2 days we can look into it more. Okay, I don't see any further hands, perhaps. I'll pass to you.
Thank you. And thank you for this very interesting presentation. You all heard during the high level that we just adopted the national strategy for disaster risk management, and one of the important parts of the strategy is what we want to do is collect all of the activities and everything that we invest in disaster risk management into one place, and find a way after that to track the future investments, at least not the past ones. Did we manage to do it? I don't know. I don't think it's a complete list for sure. And even when it was a bit bigger, it turned out that it's billions and billions. But still, a lot of the activities that and investments in the country are not called disaster risk reduction, are not called climate change adaptation. So they're sort of fall through the cracks. So I found this very interesting, especially the part about getting political commitment through this tracking, because I think it's very important. Well, the whole investing is very important in general, but explaining it to politicians how important it is to invest in prevention and not just response, that is usually the visible part. And what we all see and what we all heard this morning at the high level roundtable. There was a lot of talk about documents, but that's about it as far as prevention is concerned. The rest of the talk was about investing in response, investing in preparedness, and that's because this part of how effective risk financing is in terms of prevention is not that visible. So I think this could make it a bit more visible, and then we could compare losses with what we invested in. I'm taking up our time. We have a 15-minute break for coffee. Please be back on time because we're already late, as you know, and we're going to start again at 15:05. Okay, thank you guys. Where is everyone? Okay, ready or not, we're starting. So, I hope you had a good break, even though it was really short. And we can continue with a presentation from our colleagues and longtime partners from DG ECHO. Juan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Natasha. And thank you so much for inviting DG ECHO B2 to this workshop in beautiful Dubrovnik. My name is Juan Calpan Montero, and I am Planning and Programming Officer at the Prevention and Preparedness, Prevention and Disaster Risk Management Unit in DG ECHO. More precisely, I work in the Prevention and Preparedness Program team. And today I will present our work as regards the UCPN Prevention and Preparedness Program, whose aim is to co-finance projects that support the efforts of eligible countries in the field of disaster risk management. A first consideration first must be made in relation to the need to invest in disaster prevention and preparedness, which was already stressed many times today. We believe that this is more essential than ever to do it now, and it will be key to adapt to the current and to the future world, taking into account the impact of climate change. This type of investment would help reducing the socioeconomic impact of disasters. For instance, some few statistics between 1980 and 2020, disaster caused by natural hazards alone affected nearly 50 million people in the EU, generating an estimated economic loss of around 487 billion. So investment in disaster resilience is key, and it would also help to unlock socioeconomic growth, regardless of whether a disaster occurs, in particular in cases when the investment integrates smart features. So in the prevention and preparedness team in DG ECHO, we work in enhancing these areas of civil protection by using grants. We have two lines of grants: direct grants to countries, also called as Track 1, and a call for proposals for multi-country beneficiaries known as Track 2. So the presentation will be structured around 4 main points. I will refer to the work that we have done in previous years in these two tracks. I will also briefly refer to the current calls for which we are now working the preparation of the grant agreements. And I will also give a few notes on the future of the UCPN Prevention and Preparedness Program of next year. And I will finalize my presentation with a few notes on success stories, namely on projects funded under our program, which have demonstrated a particular added value. So the calls for single country projects for disaster risk management, also known as Track 1, started in 2019 with the purpose of helping national civil protection authorities in UCPN participating countries to fill a gap of different nations. It could be technical, financial capacity gaps by planning or preparing investment, as well as by developing strategic knowledge for strengthening the institutional and policy framework. Track 1 is a dedicated technical assistance fund for civil protection authorities, and flexibility is one of its key features. It means that civil protection authorities are in the driving seat from the very beginning, as they are the ones that can better identify the needs of the country. And the spectrum of activities eligible for financing under this call is very broad. It can include, for instance, support to civil protection authorities to coordinate with other government sectors or subnational actors in the preparation of disaster risk management. Also, preparation of investment plans for implementation of prevention and resilience recovery, the financing of studies for structural prevention and preparation measures like feasibility studies, for instance, or cost-benefit analysis. In this period of time, there have been 3 calls funded under the MFF and the Next Generation EU funding. resulting in a total of 24 grants awarded to 14 different UCPM countries, for a total of more than 8 million euro, with 11 projects already complete and 7 projects for the moment ongoing. Between these years, the countries receiving the higher number of grants were Latvia with 4 times, Croatia 3 times, and other countries, including, for instance, Montenegro and Turkey, 2 times. Track 1 can address different type of hazards, but the big majority of projects, as we can see in this slide, had a multi-hazard focus, especially last year. In addition to Track 1, we also have calls for multi-country projects, also known as Track 2, addressing public and private entities from UCPM countries and participating states, but EU neighbors and enlargement countries. It can apply not only national authorities, but also subnational level authorities, local, regional, universities, NGOs, private sector companies, and international organizations. In the last year, the Track 2 call for proposals have placed a stronger emphasis in ensuring that the project's outputs address the real needs of civil protection and marine pollution authorities and are in line with their priorities. Also ensuring that the partnerships of entity will continue after the end of the project. This is relevant to ensure the continuity of the action, and also that they have a more result-oriented approach. In this period, there have been 8 calls, also funded by MFF and the Next Generation EU funding, with a total of 140 grants, making a total value of 71 million euro. For the moment, 112 projects have been already completed and 20 are still ongoing. And the main 3 coordinators and implementing actors at the level of countries were Italy, Spain, and Germany. Track 2 projects, as in the case of Track 1, can focus on different types of hazards, sectors, activities. As you can see in the slide, in the previous cycle of the multi-annual financial framework, the type of hazard most addressed were floods, followed by earthquakes and wildfires. So if we move to the present, we are currently working, as I said before, in the preparation of the grant agreement for both Track 1 and Track 2. For Track 1 this year, we have received a total of 17 proposals, and for a total amount of funding of 5 million euro. And after the evaluation, 12 proposals have been awarded, which were actually notified last week to the relevant countries. This includes, for instance, 1 to Croatia, Romania, and North Macedonia, and 3 to Turkey. This year, as in previous ones, the multi-hazard focus has been the most frequent one in the proposal. All these projects will start next year. Regarding Track 2, this year there were 2 budgetary lines for internal and external actions, depending the countries intervening, and there were 4 main priorities: risk assessment, risk awareness, early warning systems, and marine pollution. We received a total of 20 applications and 11 proposals have been awarded. The majority of them with a focus on the risk assessment priority and on the multi-hazard approach. And for this year, the main country coordinators will be Spain, Greece, and Italy. As in the case of Track 1, the project will start next year. So I would like now to refer to the future calls, those starting next year. Our intention in DG ECO is to refit and scale up the prevention and preparedness program based on the findings of recent evaluations carried out, and also in light of the recent developments in the EU and the global climate policy. Some of the challenges identified by evaluations refer to the lack of evidence on the positive impact of prevention and preparedness, often leading to decision makers to take priority on short-term investments, such as, for instance, emergency response equipment. Therefore, it's very important to have robust evidence and information to allow civil protection authorities to provide solid justification on the need to invest in ex-ante disaster risk management. A second challenge identified referred to capacity building, meaning insufficient resources for ex-ante disaster risk management. For instance, this was particularly clear in the cases of collection and analysis of data, where there was important gaps detected. A third challenge will revolve around the fragmentation of funding and assistance opportunities. Therefore, we believe that there is a need to consolidate the funding and technical assistance instruments of the EUCPN, as well as the training for preparing the funding applications. So in order to address those concerns, we are working on the revamping and strategic reframing of the current EUCPN prevention and preparedness program according to 4 principles, which consist in achieve administrative simplification and increase the efficiency for both DG ECHO and member states, ensure the highest added value of the prevention and preparedness financing to the entire EUCPN, to develop a result-oriented monitoring of projects and reporting, and strive for high quality of the project's finance, and provide robust technical guidance to beneficiaries during the implementation. We are therefore taking into account these elements for the drafting of next year calls. And in addition, we are trying to align the priorities of these calls to the disaster resilient goals and the wildfire prevention priorities to the extent possible. In this regard, please let me refer to the ongoing work on the disaster resilient goals. As you may know, the latest revision of the EU civil protection legislation in May last year reinforced prevention and preparedness through the inclusion of specific provisions on union-wide disaster resilient goals. These disaster resilient goals will set an agenda for a more ambitious and comprehensive European disaster and emergency management system, in which resilience would be a cross-cutting element across all the management areas of the EU CPM, including prevention, preparedness, and response. So the disaster resilient goals will be adopted in the form of a Commission recommendation, probably by the end of the year, and the work on the first recommendation is still ongoing. For the moment, 5 overarching goals have been identified by the Commission and by member states, which are improving risk assessment, anticipation, and risk management planning, increasing risk awareness and preparedness of the population, enhancing early warning, and enhancing UCPN response capacity, and strengthening disaster and emergency preparedness of civil protection. So, as I said, our calls will be coherent with these specific goals. I would also like to refer to another element that will inspire the preparation of the next year calls, which is the Wildfire Prevention Action Plan. So with the objective of fighting this threat, which has been devastating this summer across Europe, a UCPN action plan for wildfire prevention was announced to member states on 5th of September by the European Commission. The action plan should be launched in the first month of next year, and it will propose a number of actions, including starting a dialogue process with member states on wildfire disaster prevention, offering prioritized financial support through a strategic use of the UCPN prevention and preparedness funding instruments for projects that support wildfire prevention and improve the uptake of good practices and research results, and also facilitating the maximum use of EU fund for investment in wildfire prevention. So the design of the calls will take into account these objectives to the extent possible, of course, without neglecting other type of hazards, especially the multi-hazard approach. So in view of the elements mentioned before, the 2 calls will consist in the technical assistance for disaster risk management, the current track 1, and the call for knowledge for action in prevention and preparedness, the current call track 2. The call on technical assistance for disaster risk management will retain the focus on administrative capacity building for civil protection and disaster risk management authorities, supporting investment, reforms, studies. The budget will be composed by both MFF, and there will be also aligned on the next generation EU funding. The budget will be slightly higher than this year, as we took into account the fact that some more countries became eligible. Bosnia and Herzegovina as a participating state in the UCPN, but also Albania, Moldova, Georgia, Ukraine, and Kosovo, in view of their efforts to become UCPN participating states. Let me refer briefly to the NGO funding, which will allow the development of preparedness actions for public health crises. For instance, this funding could be used to support eligible countries' efforts in enhancing their capacity for disaster prevention and preparedness activities, including in relation to COVID-19 crisis, and support the exchange of knowledge, risk assessment, risk awareness, economic analysis in view of preparing and preventing a possible reemergence of COVID-19 or related crises. Another new element to take into account in this call, in the former track 1, is that next year the call will be launched in e-grants, so following the electronic procedure designed by the European Commission. As we understand that this change might add some complexity, we would like also to have your feedback on possible training on e-grants that you might need to fulfill the application. We will have a dedicated session on UCPN, including on grants for Bosnia and Herzegovina in December this year. And we are considering also new information sessions for new eligible countries. Also, as part of the technical assistance for disaster risk management, we are working on the configuration of another strand of calls, but not for next year though, consisting on external technical assistance contracted by the Commission. So the idea would be that an eligible country could submit an application for technical assistance, which would be carried out through indirect management by an organization with expertise in the subject. This strand might be of particular interest for those eligible countries that could face more difficulties, for instance, in finding expertise in-house to develop the proposals of the projects, as it will help to reduce transactional cost. Also for track 1, we would like from our unit to encourage national authorities to conduct a thorough analysis of the needs when drafting the proposals in order to ensure quality. It is important to keep in mind that the project starts from the project proposal, and that a solid proposal is key to ensure ownership and to put the project on the right track from the very beginning. Also, the budget needs to be clear and consistent with the activities proposed. So in case of doubts, it's always a good previous informal consultation with our unit before submitting the proposal. Regarding the track 2 called the Knowledge for Action in Prevention and Preparedness, next year it will cover 3 topics: prevention, preparedness, and exercises, within a single call document and with a single period for applying. It will remain, as in previous years, multi-country, and the budget will include a line from the MFF and also from the next generation EU funding. As I said before, it will be aligned, as in the case of the extract 1 call, with the disaster resilient goals and the wildfire prevention priorities to the extent possible. And both calls will be launched in the first quarter of next year, probably around February. I would like also to refer to the information hub. We are starting to develop an online information hub as part of the Knowledge Network platform to provide our beneficiaries and potential beneficiaries with guidance on project preparation, tips and tricks to prepare the proposal, and also explanatory webinars, for instance. And we expect an increase in the exchanges among projects. We will also provide a comprehensive overview of other EU funding instruments for disaster risk management and examples of good practices. And I would like to finish my presentation by quickly mentioning a few examples of good practices, of successful projects in both track 1 and track 2 that we consider as good examples to follow for the added value that they represent. For instance, in track 1, I would like to refer to the project carried out by Croatia in 2019, in which the Civil Protection Authority received a grant to develop its 10-year national strategy for disaster risk management and action plan. This strategy helped the country to meet the enable conditions for accessing the cohesion policy funds for the period 21-27. Despite some implementation challenges, mainly due to COVID-19, the earthquakes in the country, the deliverables were successfully developed, and following also a cross-sectoral and collaborative approach between the relevant ministries. The new disaster risk reduction strategy also contributes to fulfill the commitments under the Sendai framework and also helps to facilitate a faster implementation of investment in disaster risk management due to the list of already identified projects included in the action plan accompanying the strategy. And one very positive element is that the 2020 and the 21 projects by Croatia built on the results of the 2019 project. And this is a very good example of sustainability and continuity, and also of maximizing synergies between different EU funding instruments. In the case of track 2, I would like to mention 3 examples. The SUMAP's NIM project of 2015, carried out by a big consortium integrated by many countries, including Portugal, Turkey, Spain. This project developed a probabilistic hazard model for tsunamis generated by earthquakes, covering the coastlines of Northeast Atlantic, the Mediterranean, and connected sea. And I think it's a very good example of collaboration among such a big amount of entities. The ASPIRES project, carried out between 2017 and 2019, was performed by a consortium integrated by entities from North Macedonia, Bulgaria, and Germany. And it consisted in the development of advanced systems for prevention and early detection of forest fires, including the development of guidelines for building a remote system for early detection of forest fires, integrating sensor networks and drones for data collection. And I would also like to mention the Overflow project of 2019 on vulnerability assessment of embankments and bridges exposed to flooding hazards, carried out by a consortium formed by Croatian, Slovenian, and Dutch entities. These 3 countries are particularly vulnerable to cross-border flooding from major European rivers, and the project aims to address the limitations of risk assessment of bridges and embankments, and to move from the model of periodic inspections approach to a more real-time risk assessment based on technology. So these are only a few examples of good cooperation and coordination between entities from different countries to achieve outcomes and objectives that are relevant to the whole community and that have a clear EU added value. So I wouldn't like to finish without inviting you to follow the Knowledge Network platform to find out more about our work. For instance, information about the next year calls that will be published in the next weeks, and also to register for the Knowledge Network newsletter. So that was all from my side. I hope it was of interest to you. And if you have any question, I will be happy to take it. Thank you.
Where is the money? Yeah. of course, of course. So if you can't think of anything right now, you can of course ask questions during the day or during tomorrow, or ask them in writing and send them to Juan's email and get answers that way. This was very interesting, but also very useful information as far as I'm concerned. So thank you very much, Juan. We already have a couple of ideas cooking up for the track 1 project, so also track 2. And of course, it's very interesting to see what other countries are doing, so that we can maybe copy some of it and not try and invent the wheel every time we want to finance something. I suggest we move on with the agenda, and then if you come up with any of the questions later on, you can ask them later on. So our next presentation is going to be from a representative from of UNDP or a consultant of UNDP about insurance and risk financing. And I'm just going to put it on. Oh, there it is. This one, right? But you sent me in PDF. Well, you can also go through PDF. It's probably easier in PowerPoint, but yeah, that's the one we have. Ne PDF. Uh-huh. Okay. Can you send it PowerPoint? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Ah, okay. It's showing. Yeah.
Okay. Hi. So we had a little disaster with PowerPoint. It's done now. And I'm actually going to speak about insurance of disasters. Yeah, my name is Rom. I work through my company, RHA Group, various activities. And the reason why I'm here is because I'm engaged by the UNDP Insurance and Risk Financing Facility, conducting a study focused on insurance and disaster risk financing in the Western Balkans, focused on 5 countries. So my original plan was a bit of an old school, sharing with you what we have been doing with respect to every country. We're in the midst of interviewing the various stakeholders in every such country. So thanks to everyone involved and helping us. But then I've realized that you would much more benefit from accessing some of the elements, not referring to every country individually, and also the solutions that we believe are viable in such context. So we approach it with a lot of ambitions, but also very humbly. We are very keen to collaborate. My task in this context is to essentially outline the status quo and all the obstacles, and then really come up with a roadmap. During this process, we were very happy to learn that some of those processes are occurring. So if there are going to be any feedback in the context of processes related to insurance, risk financing occurring in the region, and like I learned today in the first half, for example, the utilization of some quite interesting mechanisms such as risk pools and the World Bank CAT drawdown options, I would be very happy to hear about those. So, okay. So they're going to be four main parts. I'll very quickly browse you through what UNDP does, what I personally do. Then we'll focus on the Western Balkans, focusing on key problems. I don't think we've been discussing problems today so far. So I'd like to discuss some problems in the context of insurance, of course, and then also discuss some solutions that, from my perspective, could be effectively applied in the region. And lastly, we'll finish with three examples looking at other countries, Turkey, Israel, and Chile, of some instruments that were successfully implemented and possibly could be also used in the Western Balkans. With that, I'll start very quickly. I'll very quickly tell you what UNDP, what's the Insurance and Risk Financing Facility, which is a new, essentially, entity, if you will, that was established in 21. What they're focusing on from an insurance perspective. There are 5 key areas. The first one is the integration of insurance into development projects. The second one deals with making insurance more inclusive, i.e. Embedding insurance or making insurance more commoditized and accessible to communities that are vulnerable but have difficulty accessing it for various reasons, either because the product is not good enough, because it's expensive, or insurers don't necessarily care about those populations. The third part is protection from a governmental perspective, so more of either a macro hedge, so a hedge that protects a government for various purposes. And the last two parts deal with insuring of natural capital, such as coral reefs, because it has other consequences. And lastly is integration of insurance in SDG financing in various projects, as for instance, when one tries to establish preventive infrastructure, but during the process of the build out, the project can be impaired due to natural disasters, and insurance could kick in and help. Now, that's UNDP. Quickly, on me, I do 2 main things. The first one is that type of work, helping NGOs, governments, nonprofit organizations, and the public sector thinking about insurance and viable solutions. And the second part is my work in the private sector, where I structure, design, and help placing the instruments that are developed in the first part or other unrelated instruments. So with that, I'll jump into the Western Balkan region. As you know, some of the things I'm going to say are very evident and clear to everyone, but nonetheless, for sake of completeness, I'll just cover them. The Western Balkans is exposed to many types of perils. This is an example of what you see here is flooding in North Macedonia in the last 60 years. So a lot of green dots. Obviously, there's earthquake risk. The other risks that we feel more recently, apart from flooding and earthquakes, just to mention, could be droughts, heat waves, excessive rains, and not all. And the problem, given the high vulnerability to natural catastrophes, the problem is that there are no mechanisms that are scalably used and are protecting from the micro, all the stakeholders from the micro to the macro. So that includes the fact that insurance penetrations are quite low. The people don't tend to buy insurance against catastrophes. There are various reasons for this, which we'll cover later on. In addition to this, large events could impair the economy big time when we're looking at percentage of the GDP that can be impaired due to 1 in 200 natural disasters. That could be considerable impact, causing governments being dependent on donors, causing governments increasing their debt burden, which is by no means good for the economy. infrastructure, whether critical infrastructure and roads and bridges are exposed to this, and also in many cases the preventive infrastructure is not modern enough to do the right job. And lastly is post-disaster. Typically, in many cases, and I'm not referring to particular countries in the context of this overview. So some elements are less applicable to certain countries, some more, but there are many similarities. As such, generally, they're not always very clear processes on what to do after a disaster, both from the reconstruction perspective, but also financially, where to get the money from to deal with reconstruction and recovery. Insurers have challenges. Many insurers focus on simpler line of businesses, such as automobile and other type of businesses, which are easier to model. The products are simpler, and the profitability is more predictable. When it comes to Nat Cat, because it's a volatile business and some risks are very difficult to model and to underwrite, such as flood, essentially insurers have a hard time investing their resources, their money in developing appropriate products. It costs a lot of money, the capacity building. So it's not really within the focus, but also the consumers, the levels of poverty in some regions, the awareness of the benefits of insurance, the belief that it will not happen, and if it will happen, it's not really my problem, it's my government's problem. So all those aspects, and if you marry it to some trust elements, sometimes individuals buy insurance and they think it covers everything, but it doesn't. And sometimes insurers are not so eager to pay for the coverage that the consumers paid for. So the lack of trust or insufficient trust between insurers and insureds also doesn't help in this context. There are other mechanisms that actually are implemented by certain governments, and they demotivate the growth of the insurance market and demotivate consumers to buy insurance. In some countries, governments deliberately reimburse through certain mechanisms. And I was actually, this is an example from North Macedonia, but I was actually told this morning that there are some positive changes, meaning that perhaps gradually those schemes are being eliminated. So there are schemes whereby governments essentially reimburse individuals through some process when some natural disasters hit, and they reimburse those who are uninsured, and those who are insured are not entitled to get that compensation. So rationally speaking, if I'm a consumer and this scheme works, I wouldn't necessarily want to buy insurance, because essentially it will not happen, and if it happens, the government will pay. Let's summarize. What we have seen is that private insurance essentially fails from a CAT perspective. It's limited, and there's much more risk than there's much more uninsured risk than insured risk, which, by the way, is not something very unique to the Western Balkan region. It's something very common in many other places and in industrialized countries. You might be, for example, I've been amazed to learn that, for instance, California, which is one of the most vulnerable places in the world from an earthquake perspective, only 8% of the properties are insured. So it's a general problem, and we'll speak about solutions later. Individuals are not so keen on buying insurance. Some government schemes demotivate the growth of this space. And lastly, in some sectors, like in agriculture, subsidies are introduced to pay for some of the premiums, which is supposed to motivate individuals to buy more insurance. It didn't work that successfully in the region. And lastly, is more of a macroeconomic concern, is that governments are exposed to the same risks, and yet there are no very sustainable solutions. So let's speak about possible solutions. I'm not saying that any of this solution will necessarily work. It would depend on the particular country, but I'm saying that there's a menu of solutions. Some of them would work better for particular countries, some of them would be worse, but from my perspective, this is the menu of solutions that we could identify, and if there are any other ideas, I would be more than happy to hear about those. So what worked quite well is in many other places is the following. One way forward is to make CAT or agriculture insurance or any type of assets that are exposed to natural catastrophe risk, essentially make the risk transfer mandatory. We'll talk about some examples later. In some line of businesses and some industries such as agriculture, which are strategically important sectors in the regions, subsidies in combination with the mandatory and with the fact that insurance could be mandatory, and through investment in education and making people aware of the benefits, could work. If that's also coupled with reasonable distribution or a way to essentially collection of premiums, how, let's say, the insurance becomes mandatory, how the government assures that everybody pays, what's the right method. And then also products have to be quite clear. So if you're paying taxes, you know why you're paying taxes. If you're paying premium for insurance, you would want to know what exactly is that you're getting for the service from the government. Other examples that are possible solutions that are connected to actually the first example to a large extent is establishing of governmental structures, so-called risk pools. In some cases and in some industries and in some countries, for example, in the US or in Romania or in Turkey or in Israel, the governments actually take the risks with the insurance companies or the reinsurance companies. Those are the insurers of the insurers. And by introducing such scheme and making insurance mandatory and working on essentially the business plan of this scheme or the financial plan of this scheme, that could lead to a successful reduction or a successful increase of the penetration levels, shrinking the protection gap in the country. So I'd like to show a few other instruments that can be married to the previous ideas. The first one is catastrophe bonds. And the second one, or the second idea, or the second solution is disaster-linked contingent credit. In catastrophe bonds, what happens is that the government seeks to interact with investors, not insurers and reinsurers, and they buy a solution or a protection against the predefined perils, such as earthquake or such as flood or others. And they essentially tell investors, we'll pay you a premium, okay? And if the event, and we'll buy from you, say, 50 million euros of protection against earthquakes. If there are no earthquakes, you'll get your money back, the 50 million, and that's also not part of the budget. This 50 million is not going to the budget of the government, it goes into a trust account, and that's what makes it essentially cheaper, because the investors don't take the credit risk of the government, they just take the natural catastrophe risk. So the money sits in the trust account, investors get paid the interest or the premium for that, and if there are no earthquakes, they get back their money, 50 million plus the interest. If there is an earthquake that satisfies certain conditions, we'll see a few examples, or one example, the government gets the money, the 50 million, and essentially the government can do whatever they want with this, meaning that can go for reconstruction activities, for humanitarian aid. Essentially, that's not so much a concern for the investors who hedge the government through the catastrophe bond. Another example is a product offered by the World Bank in this instance. That's called a drawdown option, a CAD drawdown option, or what it is it's a disaster-linked contingent credit, and the various structures, but essentially once there is a catastrophe that it can be triggered quite easily, essentially. No need to prove of damage, but the government needs to inform or declare that there is an emergency situation, and then there is access to a capital. It's just more cost effective, because let's say that you think that in a 1 in 200 year event, you need 100 million euros. One way to tackle it is to borrow 100 million euros, but you need to pay the interest, and also you need to return back the money. The cheaper option is that, okay, let's rather hedge the scenario in the following way. If there's going to be a 1 in 100 year event, I'll get the money then. And that makes it more cost effective. So that's a very intelligent solution, a very intelligent ex-ante solution that can be used. So in this context, governments that want to establish risk pools, or also buy a macro solution that will provide them with funding once there is a natural disaster, one way to deal with this is by issuing catastrophe bonds or disaster-linked contingent financing that we've seen here. What it does is that it doesn't increase the debt. It's more cost-effective. It's flexible because the proceeds could be used for whatever the government deems to be appropriate. Let's see one example of how that could be implemented. So what you see in the middle of the screen is a hypothetical natural disaster or a risk pool that has two parts. It has the governmental participation, and then it also has a risk transfer component. So there are various ways to design it, and it doesn't have to be very expensive. What could be utilized is reinsurance that would help paying out in case that there are payouts. Donors could be used, and the disaster-linked notes, disaster-linked financing could be used in this context as well. Okay. So, to switch the discussion from more theoretical or academic, I'd like to show some examples. Some of them might be well known to the audience, so let's go through them. This is the Turkish catastrophe insurance pool. So what was implemented with the help of World Bank after the 99 event, which was disastrous, is the establishment of the Turkish catastrophe insurance pool. Going fast forward, it led to very high penetration levels. The invoices, or if you like, the collection is quite intelligent, for example, through electricity or water bills. It's mandatory, and it's working. Luckily, also, there were not very significant earthquake events since 1999. So by that time, there is an adequate amount of reserves that was generated through the premiums charged by the government. And that mechanism or that structure is also backed by reinsurers. And for some periods of time, the TCIP, the Turkish Catastrophe Insurance Pool, issued also CAT bonds, and fairly large. I think in total it was 600 million euros. That worked. Another example in the context of agriculture is an example that we see here from Israel. So the state of Israel established a vehicle called Kanat, which is an agriculture insurance pool. 50% of this vehicle is owned by the state, and 50% is owned by the farmers' unions. So the shareholders, to some extent, they have alignment. The purpose of this vehicle of Kanat is not to make money and pay dividends to the farmers' unions and the government in Israel. The purpose is to break even and to charge an actuarially fair rate, leading to a break-even situation as much as possible. Essentially the second, so that's the first category of support to the farmers. Essentially the government pays all the claims that are being filled by the farmers. And it's a very the product landscape or the product catalog is quite rich. The crops are quite heterogeneous, from vegetables to wheat. So there are hundreds of different products and a lot of data that enables this whole thing work and make the structure financially viable. And the second type of support from the government to the farmers is in a form of subsidies. So not only that the government is selling the insurance, but also the government pays some of the subsidies, depending on the crop and so on and so forth. So that level of involvement where the government is the insurer, but also pays the subsidies, that made it work quite effectively. And the last example before I ramp up my presentation is an example of a parametric catastrophe bond from Chile. So in 2018, with the support of the World Bank, the government of Chile issued a $500 million bond. So that protects the state against earthquakes. So what you see on the right-hand side of the slide is a grid map. Every grid represents the respective exposure of Chile on that map. So the areas with higher exposure, such as Santiago, would be triggering payouts also for shallow earthquakes. So even if the magnitude is, say, 6.7. But those areas with lower exposure from the governmental perspective will be triggered only if a very severe earthquake happens, like an 8 magnitude. The cost of this bond was 2.5% of interest, and it was a 3-year instrument issued by the government of Chile to the capital markets. So that's all what I wanted to share with you today.
So, Ron, thank you for your presentation. The Croatia was one of the countries that has incentives for agricultural sector, but well, it didn't quite do it well. What I was we have in Croatia, we have a law on mitigation on consequences on natural hazards. I don't know how to translate it. And it's fine. Okay, we have a law that deals with the consequences. But there is an article that says if you are taking care of yourself, if you are insured, the state is not going to help you. But if you do nothing and wait for disaster, the state will help you. That actually doesn't make sense. So you show us really nice examples, but if there is no collaboration between sectors like finance and DRR, well, we can do nothing.
That was just a comment, not a question. Okay, thank you. It's exactly what I wanted to comment on as well. We have a legislative framework, but it's not implemented, or it's not really structured that well. And sometimes when it is, it's not implemented that well. So.
Thank you for the presentation. I am Eren from Turkey, from AFAD. My question is, you said that it is mandatory in Turkey, the issuance of TCIP. So if it isn't mandatory, so which percentage will be like California 8 or 10? Huh? And also, one more, and also my colleague also mentioned, the people believe that government will help the victims. So people doesn't want to make any insurance. So for Turkey example, I believe that if any compulsory or mandatory, it will be less than 8 maybe. Yeah.
I actually had a question for you, or either of you as well. The insurance is mandatory. I know you also have mandatory insurance in Romania. We learned that during the peer review 2 weeks ago. But still, it's 50%. So if it's mandatory, it should be even higher than that. And we were talking to our colleagues from, I don't know, France and Spain, and the insurance there is really, really high. They say it's because of the culture and history. But are there any ideas on how to make it even better? Even though it's mandatory, it's not that high. I think it's even less in Romania than 50%. So.
Thanks. So first, the private sector can also play a role. For example, banks. Banks sell mortgages, and if they don't buy insurance themselves, or if they don't force the mortgage borrower to buy insurance against earthquake or flood or natural perils, then there will be a hot potato that is essentially going to be transferred to the bank if there is an earthquake. So for example, in California, the banks, they don't force the individuals to buy insurance against earthquakes. It can be just insurance without the earthquake part because it's expensive. But in Florida, for instance, the penetration levels are much higher because banks, it's a different state, but banks are, they don't want, there are a lot of hurricanes, so they can understand that their portfolio could be worth nothing if there's a hurricane that hits their portfolio, so they force the individuals to do so. So the private sector can also play a role. There are other countries where banks are more aggressive in that and demanding that. Perhaps regulation could be also used, because the role of the regulator is to, make sure that risks are addressed. How exactly, that's another question, but there is a risk of. So that's why in California it's quite low. So I think to the first question, I don't know, in some places the penetration levels are almost zero because it's not mandatory. In others, it's not mandatory, but penetration levels are quite high because the private sector, the banks, force individuals to buy it. There's also cultural elements and that has to do with the risk awareness. Getting rid of this mindset that it will never happen, or if it happens, it's not really my problem. So the law in Croatia, for example, that has been mentioned, that what can I say? It has to be deleted, but it's like, what else can be said? If there's a law that demotivates to do something and this something is important, so that law has to be cancelled. I don't know what else can be done. There are no magics. And on the subsidies, I guess in agriculture, this is quite vital, because agriculture is probably one of the riskiest business that you have there, because unlike buildings, buildings don't move, they are static, but crops, they are changing from one season to another, and the riskiness to analyze is more difficult, and they're exposed to so many perils. So I think it's difficult to implement a functioning agriculture insurance without any subsidies. if you take the most industrialized countries, such as the US, for instance, it's also heavily subsidized. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. Really interesting. I'll go to my colleague after. I just had maybe kind of a comment or question. I'm not really sure, but I found it interesting, the point about trust as well. And I think especially that's something that if you look at, I mean, I have a background working in the Pacific and where you have very informal sectors, people aren't even formalized in any kind of census. So how do you kind of develop the trust to kind of pay into some kind of fund that would maybe, if there's catastrophe event, will pay them or not? And what they did in some instances, I think it was a UNDP project, was to pool kind of farmers' funds into this kind of microinsurance, using microinsurance tools into kind of a fund, and that way they created some kind of incentive for communities through kind of parametric risk mechanisms. But again, really socializing that concept took forever. So I guess a common question is how kind of, if you have ideas on how to bring in maybe more informal sector. We look at the context in Europe with migration at the moment, lots of movement of people that aren't formalized in societies, how to kind of bring them in with the increased, I guess, risks that we face. So quite a few elements there, but maybe pass to Helena first and then.
Yeah, I'm also from UNDRR on the local level resilience, so working with cities. And cities normally don't have access to, I mean, it's much harder for cities to get access to climate finance, resilience finance, because they can't be the guarantors for international loans and etc. So I wonder if you can give us examples in which cities may be doing bonds, or cities applying for kind of insurance or funding, something like this. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So for the first part on microinsurance, trust is just built over time. I think has nothing to do with insurance, just so campaigns and education, but then there are like quicker methods, a bit like not brute force, but essentially sometimes if one wants to get loans, just as, and I've been involved in say in Africa, like it's easier to sell money than selling insurance. In insurance, you tell someone pay premium and I'll promise I'll pay if something wrong happens. That's quite hard to sell, yeah. But selling money, credit is easier. People need money. So, but if you look, for example, in Africa, would have farmers that don't have they don't have collateral. Like their collateral is maybe the yield that they produce. But then if there is bad weather, that kind of destroys the collateral. So you tell them, fine, buy insurance, and insurance is going to be your collateral. And that like does two things, because it improves the credit worthiness of the farmers, and also it educates farmers about insurance. And in many cases, those that buy this insurance are not really the farmers, but the aggregators, i.e. entities that aggregate the activities of the farmers, off-takers, or fertilizer companies. But that can work, and trust is a matter of building it and educating, I think, and changing the culture a bit. On cities, frankly, I personally was not doing a lot in that direction. I appreciate the difficulties. So I personally don't have a lot of involvement in that context. So I wouldn't know which mechanism would be, perfectly suitable.
We have a participant here in the workshop from EFDRR, so maybe you have an idea for the cities to also, I mean, I know you're a workshop participant here, but maybe you can help with this question if you have any.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron. We work also on agriculture and these aspects, and we discussed this morning with Roman all these issues. For the cities, what we've done, but it's not unfortunately implemented because of there was no government support. We provided, actually we developed sub-sovereign models for this is in Western Balkan, in Macedonia, Serbia, and in Albania. And through those sub-sovereign models, actually, if an adverse weather event, in this case it was earthquake, I'm telling about earthquake and flood, happens, then there was certain amount of funds that will be returned back to this local budget. There was an interest, but then somehow, even though the cities are, I'm now speaking about these countries where I have experience, are decentralized and have their own budgets. Again, they were in a way dependent from the central budget, and they were afraid whether this is what should be done. We had we implemented in Serbia one sub-sovereign model in agriculture, and it's again municipality, but a rural municipality, and there 1 year there was a payout based on which payout then the municipality was by its disclosure could allocate those funds for the most vulnerable to the farmers that were hit from the flood event. So that's what we've done, that's our experience. But something that actually I was planning, now I'll continue because I wanted to raise a hand. Something that I think it's good now after this presentation of Ron that we can maybe discuss, and even we from this financial point of view listen and understand, is that how we should now bundle or do certain synergy between the risk reduction and finance, and how we can jointly improve the protection in all these countries around in the Western Balkans, because I really think that we operate in parallel, and yes, we develop models. Some of them are implemented. Let's say in Macedonia, we are now in the process of Europa is implementing the agriculture insurance pool, for which which I mentioned it previously. But then it's not only the pool. There are a lot of, we also need actually these farmers sometimes need to be protected. There is a need of rescue. We had such a situation in Tetovo, Stajkovci, and where all their homes were flooded, and not only the fields. Yes, we can provide insurance, property insurance. We can provide parametric flood or any kind of insurance, but then again, we also need the support from the other disaster risk part of the story. So maybe even we can learn something from the audience here, and it was more a comment.
Yeah, agreed. We can learn from each other, and we have to cooperate. It would be a perfect example of a public-private partnership, right? We all have something to gain, but also something to learn from each other. Yes, we have one more here.
So regarding the emergency situations and the correlation with financing, for example, in Romania, if you start a new job or you have a new, a new enterprise, or you buy a new house, you are mandatory to get an insurance. The problem is when you already have a house or a business already going, because you are not required to have any more insurance or to have your insurance extended. So therefore you get the cases of people, old families living in the mountainside in a landscape scenario where there's the risk of a landslide. The mayor comes and tells them they can move to a new plot of land, but they don't want to leave their homes because it's their ancestral home. And it's just those kinds of beliefs that you must fight with. So therefore, I don't know how to use information and awareness campaigns in order to prevent those. Therefore, it's a lack between the prevention part and the financing part. For new projects, yes, financing and insurance works amazing, but for already existing projects, not so well.
Okay, so what we heard a couple of times is raising awareness.
For the cities, what we also do, I forgot it, that we cooperate with some banks, and the banks, we mentioned that when they give a mortgage, they request that property insurance to be provided by the client. So the banks are actually calculated in their package, I can say, the mortgage, sometimes standard or micro earthquake coverage, which actually, in that way, the coverage in Macedonia, it's now, or the penetration is higher. So that's what.
Okay, thank you. Any more comments or questions? Okay, so we can still think about it throughout today and discuss it during the evening as well. Thank you for this interesting presentation. It triggered a discussion. Well, I propose we go on with the next presentation, and then we can perhaps, if you think of any more questions, we can discuss some more. I would like to welcome Susanna from the World Bank to tell us a little bit about investing in disaster risk management. Oh, I have to, yeah.
Just while we're getting set up, a good example is also New Zealand and Christchurch. They have an interesting public asset insurance program, so that might be something. And an interesting part of that is that banks, insurance group actually encourage risk reduction and risk prevention. If you go on their website, it's part of their mandate to actually raise awareness on risk reduction. Okay, I realize I'm the last presentation of today, so it's going to be a bit difficult. I understand if you're a bit tired, and there was also so much information told already. What I'll do, I'll promise to be short. I really just wanted to highlight some key results and highlights from a study that World Bank conducted together with European Commission. It was part of a program called Economics for Disaster Prevention and Preparedness. We finished phase 1. These are the products. They're available online. I will share with you then a link. And we are starting now a phase 2, as I mentioned earlier this morning. So if you are interested, do reach out to me. In this program, we looked at 3 elements of disaster risk management, meaning finance, investments, and capacity. And at the onset, we were thinking, why is actually investing in disaster risk management an issue? Why are people not investing in it? Is it because they lack information, how very much exposed we are to disasters? Maybe people don't understand that part, don't have enough information. Is it because we don't really understand well the costs and benefits of different investments? And a question that we also posed is actually, in fact, today, how well are countries prepared to deal with post-disaster expenses? So to tackle the first question, we did probabilistic modeling for 2 hazards, earthquake and floods. We worked with global earthquake model and developed numbers for all of EU member states. So that's what you see on the left, example of the annual average economic loss. And we also worked with private sector JBA risk management to do the same for floods. We considered in the modeling, for example, residential, commercial, industrial, healthcare, education assets. So this kind of information is actually available to you. It is on the JRC's knowledge info data website. Here is just a quick summary of basically the countries with highest average annual losses in million. The orange dot is the seismic risk, and the blue one is the floods. So I'm sure you see also some of your countries in there. Now, the second point, actually a starting point was this nice study that was commissioned by FEMA and done by the National Institute of Building Sciences. And these kind of figures, I heard it even today, many times, you know, how much is it actually investing in prevention? Is it your return 4, or is it 7, or is it between? Actually, it can be a very powerful tool for discussion with ministries of finance, with your decision makers, when you are able to tell them, so this is what you can expect in return. And we were thinking that actually we don't have such figures for Europe. How translatable are these? So this is what we tried to do. We analyzed over 70 case studies from different countries across Europe and a little beyond. We looked at different sectors, different hazards, and different types of disaster risk management investments. So, for example, we looked at structural protection, but also flood early warning. We looked at seismic strengthening, but also responder capacity building. And actually a lot of focus was also on different types of wildfire prevention. How we analyzed these case studies was through the lens of triple dividend methodology. This is a methodology that was developed earlier by Overseas Development Institute, the World Bank, and Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery. And it looks and understands the costs and benefits in a different manner. It looks at avoided losses. This is maybe something traditional, we are used to it. But we also looked and tried to quantify the potential economic additional, in fact, value through the safe environment that you are creating. There are going to be businesses. There's going to be economic value. For example, your land might be even more valuable. It is not easy to capture, but it is equally important. And third one, there are also broader co-benefits. These are the economic and social benefits that are generated. Now, if you don't consider these, of course, your benefits from investing in prevention will be smaller. But what we found out, looking at these different case studies for different hazards, actually, it is quite evident that investing in preparedness and prevention makes good economic sense. We saw that almost always the benefit-cost ratios exceeded 1. On average, they were typically between 2 to 10. And several investments showed really, really high, actually, returns. On the right side, you see this graph. The ranges are these blue panels or boxes. And what's interesting are these blue dots, because these are the outliers. These are the investments that somehow bring you really, really high investments. And why is this? When you look at them, and we went back to the case studies, these are really the smart or integrated investments. So these are investments, for example, where you had seismic retrofitting that was linked also with energy efficiency, something that also now several countries are doing. These were measures that had flood protection link also with green measures, with nature-based solutions. And these were also measures, maybe say flood protection or others, which combined early warning systems or combined improved decision-making. Now, the beauty actually of looking at this and understanding the benefits is that the second and the third dividend, this economic value and this socio, say, environmental or broader benefits, they will realize even if the first one doesn't, even if a disaster does not happen, you will reap the benefits of your investments. Here are just a few examples of the benefit cost ratios, and in the report you will find many of these case studies. Some of them might be very relevant for your countries. We looked, for example, and calculated benefit cost ratios for different types of green solutions, We looked, as I mentioned, on different types of wildfire prevention. Fuel breaks in forests showed very high, for example, a benefit ratio. But it is not just about investments, and I think we heard this also a lot today. It is actually about the capacity also of, say, civil protection agencies, but also others, to be able to do these investments. As part of the study with ECHO, we conducted interviews and surveys with several representatives from civil protection agencies and listened to the challenges they face, but also opportunities. And I think this is also an area where UCPM could go further in the next years. Oops. Sorry. Now, to the third and last part, I promise that I try to be as brief as possible. This links back to basically understanding the financial and economic footprint. We all know that disasters pose, very large shock on government expenditure and revenues. But it is actually quite difficult to isolate and track the exact disaster impacts on the economy because there are so many other factors. One way of trying to understand it better is through modeling. Now, we developed a macroeconomic and fiscal model, and what this is presented in this slide. And just in simple terms, at the heart of this model was this catastrophe risk modeling that I mentioned earlier. We took the results of the flood and earthquake models, of these realizations of many scenarios over the next 30 years. We used some economic and fiscal data and indicators and basically calculated the potential economic impact. And then we compared this to the existing risk financing instruments or arrangements that exist at the regional level and for different EU member states. But what came out was a funding gap. So we really focused on actually what is then the gap if you are hit with this kind of big earthquake or big flood and you currently have these kind of, say, reserves or insurance. What is the gap? And the gap was very large. We looked at different types of instruments that countries have. So be it national reserves, contingency lines of credit. We heard about it. For example, the CAT BDO is a contingent line of credit. We looked at household and public insurance. We looked at also different scenarios. So how do countries combine these different types of instruments that you see on the right side? And as I said, we conducted this gap analysis for EU as such, and that's on the left side. And the red is the bad thing. It's the gap. So you can see it's quite substantial. And we also did it for a few case studies: Austria, Croatia, France, and Romania. And there it really depends on the type of arrangements countries have. And it also shows you the variety. Some countries are well prepared, but others are not. So on this slide, there are just some key highlights from this finance study. And basically, we saw that in the case of a major impact, be it earthquake or flood, the impact can really exceed 7% of GDP, or even 17% in a high liability scenario. Each year, there's a 10% chance that basically a major event will exhaust existing finance at this regional level. So really a big part of the financing is covered by ad hoc financing. What this means that suddenly you need to scramble to find the money. So you either do budget cuts or you rearrange your financing. So the numbers are huge. We saw emergency costs can be also very substantial. We saw that residential assets form about 50% of average overall losses. And this links nicely to what was discussed earlier. In fact, really, the insurance of private homes is very low, and in some countries it's pretty much non-existent. These figures really go up when you also then consider public asset that are exposed. So in terms of opportunities and going forward, clearly from experience, we can see that prearranged risk financing can help manage these kind of government liabilities and reduce time to recover because you have the funding in place. Especially the liability generated from public and housing assets. These need to be tackled. So there is a need to continue improve the financial protection of the residential sector and the public assets. And I will just finish with a few just reflections also on, again, it's not just about the finance, but it's about the capacity. And what we have seen in many countries in Europe, whether you are, highly capable or not, there is need for continuous investment in the capacity, what to do post-disaster. So whether we are talking about assessment of damages, losses, and needs, or developing an overarching recovery and reconstruction strategy, and then actually being able to implement it. So say, develop quickly a housing program that will help your people make immediate repairs. I think this is really critical. I am working now on Ukraine, since Ukraine was mentioned. And although it is a very different context, some of the support we are provided, it comes actually from disaster risk management perspective. It is also the ability of assess your damages, your losses, your ability to recover, draw certain plans, and then implement. This is really something countries need to think about before disaster and need to have in place so they can quickly react. At the World Bank, also in the context of COVID-19, what we talked about is basically not necessarily build back better, but build back smarter and more sustainable. So it means also right sizing. So maybe some of your services, your infrastructure was actually obsolete and you no longer need 10 hospitals in a small area, but you only need 2 or 3. So right sizing, right placing, and modernizing them to better standards. So what the bank promoted is called Green and Resilient Inclusive Development, or GRID, which would link your development to reaching these kind of goals. And there are actually a lot of international, or even, believe it, national examples from Croatia. I picked up here a few that can or that promote these kind of approaches. Japan actually invested a lot of, say, in green infrastructure after the major the earthquake and tsunami. Chile has improved its protocol, building codes, and actually it is an impressive example of a country that had a very quickly put together a housing recovery and resilience program as well. I mentioned New Zealand earlier. Christchurch, the city council really tried to strive to improve public engagement and business engagement, number of campaigns. And again, Japan that really combined recovery with economic redevelopment and revitalization. And this is something that also I think in Croatia was or is trying to do in the aftermath of Sisak Moslavina earthquakes. We had here colleagues from AFAD. I'm so happy to hear. Turkey is, or Istanbul, it's specifically such a great example where from recovery, you really built up a comprehensive risk reduction and improved preparedness prevention program that focused on different aspects, focused on emergency management capacities, on risk reduction of public buildings, and also building code enforcement. So just to summarize, I think a key message is continue to invest in understanding risk, also understanding your gaps and the opportunities. And there are many opportunities. Investing in disaster resilience makes not only economic sense, but can give you many, many benefits. And this message needs to be drilled down to policy makers, to budget holders, so they understand. Secondly, on the financing, pre-arranged finance can help manage financial and economic impacts. And this is why it is important to do the homework before a disaster strikes. And thirdly, civil protection agencies are really critical for scaling up prevention and preparedness. It might seem that we are having the same conversations again and again in the same, in the same group, but it's not true. Actually, the discussion on DRR is now hitting such high levels. If you have a commission high-level meeting, I guarantee you there is discussion about disaster resilience. So I think we are reaching completely new levels of the discussion in this region, and it is really important to monetize on it and leverage this moment. So as I mentioned, we are conducting now phase 2 of the program that we are doing with DG ECHO. We are going to go a bit deeper on what we found out in the first phase. What I would like to do in this phase is one aspect will look at how we can actually prioritize investments in DRR. So different types of prioritization frameworks. So you can have these examples and maybe it will be useful for your countries. They would be linked to also the disaster resilience goals that were explained. So they could help you maybe operationalize these kind of disaster resilience goals. Secondly, we will look a bit more on financial capacities of UCPM, but also again of several countries. And we will be also providing some knowledge material on the website. For now, what's on the website are the results of these reports that we did. European Commission actually launched a short training video that's also available on the UCPM Knowledge Network website. So if you want to learn a bit more about this kind of outputs, the work we did, don't hesitate to look at that. I think it's a 1-hour online course, so can be done quite quickly. So I'll finish here. Don't hesitate to contact me for any questions or now, if we have time. I don't know how much time we have. Okay, good. Okay. I'll just mention I'm in Brussels. So if you're passing by, you can also see me in person. Now that COVID is over, kind of.
Zuzana, thank you for your presentation. You mentioned the example from Croatia that female workers lost their jobs in a Kamensko factory. Yeah, that's a good example, but unfortunately, it's not results of their employment afterwards are not result of some kind of strategy, or it's individual based. So it shows us that it can be done, and it's actually a good example for us at the government level, not for everybody, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's for inspiration. I think there are examples from all of the countries where something, amazing has happened, whether it was part of a strategy, it was planned, or it somehow happened because, the local mayor decided this is important, or a community of people decided it is important. And it is so important to also document these kind of examples. Any other questions? If you now ask me what's the benefit cost ratio of a very specific investment, I will not be able to answer. I forgot now all the numbers, believe it or not, but it is in the reports. Yes, but the high ones were really fire, fuel breaks. Portugal, for example, we did analysis. anything with early warning systems, decision-making support. So these are things that can be easily linked to kind of, you know, the more structural efforts. I remember we looked at Poland, flood protection, and there the benefit can be also positive because it was linked with these kind of early warning and some green measures.
Yeah, thank you. If you're interested in cost-benefit analysis, the American FEMA has done analysis of their grants, so you can just Google it and you can find it. It's quite very well. Yeah. But I want to ask you, how do you deal with unreliable data when you making analysis? Because I know from Croatia side, the data of damage and loss are quite well. Yeah, it's like, you know, finger in the ear.
Yeah, only few countries actually have very good systematic damage and loss data. We worked actually with Bulgaria to help them develop or provide some recommendations how to develop. In this kind of regional analysis, we relied on global models. The GEM, I really can only recommend for earthquake. They just updated, I think, one of their layers of information. The issue is that often, you know, these models are proprietary. So even for JBA, we were only able to access a certain level of information and could not go beyond. Interestingly, DG Klima has access also to proprietary risk modeling, economic models, Munich Re and CAT risk layer. They might be now changing their contracts on risk layer, so maybe more information will be available. But it is very difficult when you don't have information, damages, losses. But it's not impossible. You can always have something based on global models or regional models, and use that as a proxy while you improve and develop your own system. It shouldn't stop or prevent you from doing something. Maybe your uncertainty levels will be a bit higher, and you need to consider that and explain that. But it really depends on the granularity of the kind of investment you're planning. Of course, if you're planning to build a dam or a dike, your risk model has to be pretty robust. You really need detailed information. But if you're talking about, you know, something higher level and a general recommendation, you don't need the most granular assessment or model or data. Actually, in the phase 2, I hope we can show that there are some prioritization frameworks where you can do certain steps even if you don't have the you know, level of data, the really the deep level of data.
That's actually the thing that we were mentioning all the time when we made our first risk assessment and started to developing the first disaster risk reduction strategy. Everybody was asking us how we were doing it and if we have enough data and if it's detailed enough and if it's structured enough. And what we kept saying is that we just started doing it, even though we knew we didn't have anything. But if we keep postponing it, then it's never going to be done. So the first risk assessment was like a mock-up of a risk assessment. Then we learned what we had to make better in the next one and in the next one and so on and so forth. And that's basically partly also what Zavisha said. We have good examples, and what you said, Susanna, we have good examples everywhere. And we even tried to, a couple of years ago, through the National Disaster Risk Reduction Platform, sort of highlight the local good examples of investing, of green infrastructure and investing at the same time in disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation and green areas for heat waves and so on and so forth, because we wanted the other guys, which are the majority, unfortunately, to hear that it's possible and that it actually saves money. So it was really well received. It was sort of a one-off, unfortunately. Then COVID came and voila. But it was a really good discussion where the other cities that keep complaining that they don't have the money for this, they don't have the experts for this, actually saw that it's possible. You can do it without some kind of specific expertise or a lot of money. They just in one of the cities developed part of the road infrastructure in a way that can also absorb water if a flash flood came. So it's not that complicated, but you need ideas and we need to share a lot more experience on this. Okay, so if there are no more questions or comments, we can just maybe go through what we heard today. It was a big day. We got a lot of information even in the morning during the high level roundtable, or that was pretty well wrapped up by Vlatko and our directors. The first thing that we saw today were the results of the surveys. The point there was to give us an overview of the situation that we had. Unfortunately, one of the surveys wasn't that well accepted, but it's also a lesson learned that there is at least not enough information or not enough will to even for the countries to participate in this kind of service. So we can learn from the lack of information as well. So even more raising awareness, we mentioned it like a couple of dozen times today. We also learned that the SMEs we already know that the SMEs are the backbone of the national economy. So we need to make them more resilient, but we also got a few ideas on how to make them more resilient, and we have to discuss it among each other. After this, we saw the disaster risk reduction and climate change expenditure tracking presentation, which I thought was very important and very interesting for our work on the national level and what we can do in the future and how to track finances and how to discuss it. What we learned also a few weeks ago, we had a presentation in Croatia, and we kept saying that it's difficult to talk to the ministries of financing, but because they're not interested. But we also learned that we have to learn their language and sort of approach them in a way that they can understand us, and not just make them understand that disasters are there, but also we have to learn a better way to maybe approach them in the future. So we learned that the tracking of national budget is a must if we aim to spend it and to invest it in a sustainable and efficient way. But we also found a lot of very interesting questions in the presentation from the morning that we're going to borrow for tomorrow and nag you with those questions a little bit more. We're going to make you think about them at least a little bit more and make you take them home and think about them even at home in your daily work. We found after the coffee break, we heard about some opportunities that we can get from UCPM financing for track 1, for track 2. Some examples were given. Also, what's going to happen in the future with the resilience goals and how we're going to use the knowledge network hub or website. We also saw there how long it took Croatia to develop the National Disaster Risk Reduction Strategy, because as you saw it, we had a project in 2019 to develop the strategy, and it was only adopted last week. So it takes a while to adopt it, even though we had a draft for a long time, but it takes a while. It's a complicated document. Everybody has to be a part of it. We wanted everybody to be a part of it, but the biggest stop was unfortunately the financing, because when we presented it to everyone, it had a lot more billions than it has now. So it was not accepted very well, especially by the Ministry of Financing. They were telling us, where is it? Where is this money? You have to show it to us in the budget. So we had to be a lot more concrete there. We saw a presentation on insurance and risk financing, and we discussed somewhat about this. So there is much more unfortunately uninsured risk than insured risk, which is not a good thing. But we learned that basically the most important thing that we have to do is raise awareness, which is kind of slow for us. So we want to make it a bit faster with legislative framework and so on, and with public-private partnerships, so we can all cooperate there. And then we heard on investing in disaster risk management in general from Susanna and from the World Bank, basically telling us that smart investments are smart, not just smart investments, but also smart recovery. It's the only way to make it sustainable, and it's basically what we have to think of in the future. We tend to depend on ad hoc financing, which is okay if you have one disaster in 100 years, but otherwise it makes recovery really slow. So it's not an acceptable financing mechanism. At least it's what we learned today. So basically, we have to combine everything: the national level, the private companies, the local level, and all of the international institutions that can both tell us what to do, but also help us do it in the future. Today, we got a bit of an overview. Tomorrow, we're going to go a little bit more to the local level and the national level and see a few of the good practices, how other countries do it, and how some countries in the region do it. We're going to have a few discussions there. And we're also going to talk about specific sectors and the resilience of critical infrastructure right away in the morning. And we can start then developing your group action plans, and we're going to explain how you're going to do it tomorrow as well. So that's it for our online participants. We are going to be back here tomorrow at 9:30 again. As far as you guys in the room here are concerned, a small admin remark. We're going to have dinner here at 7:30, so here in this room, which means that you have to take everything that's yours with you. Today, we're going to make the room look similar tomorrow, but today they're going to completely reconstruct it into a dining area. So please take all of your belongings, the papers, the gifts, anything. And we'll see you here at 7:30 and then again at 9:30 tomorrow. Thank you everyone for the discussions and for your participants.